So hey guys, let's begin with new series. The series name is What If Naruto Married with Conan? Let's start the series. All that was surrounding her was darkness. An empty void enveloped her senses and she couldn't really feel where she was. Her memory was a little fuzzy and jumbled. Her awareness was null. Even in the blackness, she could feel herself breathing, so it felt like she wasn't dead, at least, maybe she was? She tried to wiggle her fingers and felt them moving within her power. This was surprising to her. She moved her hand and lifted her arm and felt air slowly push past her hand from the force. The wind was somewhat cool against her fingers. It wasn't until she realized that she was laying down that her memories slowly reached the surface. She remembered how she was supposed to infiltrate the leaf. Yes. That's right, I infiltrated the leaf. There was a breakout of a fight. I fell back to Nagato's other paths and everything's blank after that. Her memory failed her, and she couldn't for the life of her remember anything afterwards. Even when she would try harder to think, nothing would come up. After giving up momentarily, she attempted to open her eyes. Even without opening her eyes, she could smell the sterile atmosphere. A smell of gauze and fluids filled the air, and it was unmistakable. Opening her eyes surprisingly left her eyesight still black. She was nervous, but only as quick as it came. As she felt a cool and wet rag left upon her eyes, she lifted the rag from off her face and tried to open her eyes again. She squinted heavily as she tried to focus her vision. The room cleared and she could see that she was in a hospital room of some sort. Immediately, a sharp pain rang through her skull. Her palm rushed to her head as she moaned in frustration. She couldn't staunch the intense agony that shot through her. But after a few moments, the feeling subsided, leaving her somewhat drained. She noticed the bandages that were wrapped around her head and in one particular spot on her forehead that was sore. She sat herself up and looked at her surroundings. She was indeed in a hospital room. Her gown hung off of one of her shoulders and she could see how she had an four hooked up to her arm. She slowly pulled it out as she gained a better look at her environment. She had a window to her left that was currently closed. She couldn't see outside. Frustrated, she only assumed that she was in Konoha. Her main reasoning being that she had never seen this type of architecture in Nagato. She also saw light peeking between the blinds and AIM didn't have such a bright sky as what light was shining through the room at that moment. She stayed in her bed as she contemplated thoughtfully. She guessed that she was in Konoha and made other assumptions that she was being guarded in case she tried to leave early. She couldn't sense anyone around her, but she could be fooled. It was possible that the ninja watching over her were far more advanced than she could sense in her current state. Her thoughts were halted as the room door clicked open and a woman that looked in her 20s walked in with a clipboard. It was someone that she had been filled in with before the invasion. Conan's brows lowered in disinterest as she put on her facade. Sakura walked over with a smile on her face as she looked at the patient on the bed. Ah, Conan, you're awake. This is good news, to be honest. We were worried about you. Conan looked at the beaming woman walking towards her strangely. Worried about me? You must be kidding. She couldn't help but think that Sakura was playing some type of game with her, so she didn't acknowledge her words. Sakura came to Conan's bed and laid her palms upon her patient's head. Conan offered no resistance but looked at her nurse with clear displeasure written upon her face. She knew after they were done with their little mind game that softens her up, that she would be more willing to cooperate. But she knew better. She didn't want to cooperate with the enemy. She would rather die than give away any information. This was for the betterment of mankind, and if Nagato truly believed this, then he would do something about it, and hopefully save her in her current predicament. You know, you don't have to be so tense, Sakura replied with a slight mirth echoing from her words. It's been almost 5 years now. I would assume our relationship would have gotten better during this time. I thought we were doing well. Conan only narrowed her eyes while watching the younger woman work her hands over the bump. Where was Sakura trying to go with this? 5 years? This was a really silly way of trying to get a person to talk. After a few more moments, Sakura's hands left Conan's head and she examined everywhere else on her body for just a minor checkup on the woman on the bed. She felt Conan's eyes constantly glaring daggers upon her, and she couldn't help but feel a little worried about her safety. She quickly finished to try and change the subject. She knew that there was one thing that would make her feel better, and at least keep the attention off of her. Sakura smiled as spoke up. Well, your body seems normal. That bump on your head should go down within a week. Other than that, I think you're doing well enough to be discharged today. Sakura then wrote some things down on her clipboard as she walked to the door. Her smile opened genuinely as she continued. You have a visitor, so I'll let her in. She really misses you, you know? You've been in here for a few days and I'm sure you'd like to see a familiar face. Unfortunately, Naruto is busy so he can't make it at the moment. You know how he is." Conan was impressed at this act that was played in front of her, but she couldn't help but feel curious of this visitor. There weren't really any women that she knew, and that made her question whether or not Sakura was being genuine or clever in her wording. Why would she even bring up Naruto? All Conan knew of Naruto was that he was a Jinchuriki that needed to be captured. There was really nothing else of use there. As Sakura opened the door, she motioned for someone to come to her. After some pitter-patter, there was a smaller girl that looked into the entrance. She had blue hair that reached her shoulders with a pendant by her right ear. Her eyes were unusually blue and she had 2 whisker marks on each side of her face. Her skin was a warm color, and she wore a long-sleeve orange pastel shirt with a pair of faded purple pants. She wore paste-colored little slipper shoes that made a clacking noise with every step. The look on the girl's face was joyful as she ran up to the bed. "Mama, you're awake!" The girl ran up to the woman and tried to wrap her arms around the Conan's neck in a hug, but she was immediately rejected as the woman pushed her off of her, leaving the girl to fall to the floor. Conan was mortified. This girl called her mother. She looked at the girl and after contemplating, her eyes narrowed once more. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said while looking at Sakura. "It's a disgrace to use a child in your corrupt endeavors. I never thought Konoha would do something this low." "Mama, what are you talking about?" the girl asked, confused while rubbing her butt in an attempt to stop the stinging from when she fell. "I am your daughter, Hanan, don't you remember?" Conan gazed over to the woman who seemed to have a look of concern that fell over her features. Then her eyes strayed to the little girl and saw a similar reaction on her face. Something didn't feel right. "Okay, Hanan, I think you should leave now. I have some important things that I need to discuss with your mother," Sakura said in an authoritative tone. The little girl pouted, but trudged her feet to the entrance again before looking at her mother one more time before leaving. Once the door closed, Sakura took on a serious appearance. The happiness seemed to fade away as she stared at Conan. "I have a few questions and I want you to be honest as much as possible." After not receiving an answer from the woman in bed, she decided to ask anyway. "What is your name?" After being silent for a moment, but finding the question harmless, she answered, "Conan." "What is your affiliation?" Another small pause before she answered, "I'm in the organization known as the Akatsuki." Sakura's eyes widened before they lowered in sadness. "And finally, what is the last thing that you remember before waking up?" Conan thought momentarily, before she answered, trying to keep certain secrets to herself. I remember sitting just outside of Konoha waiting to attack your city." Sakura shook her head as she wrote down some more things on her clipboard. Her face was etched with remorse as she looked at the woman in front of her. It was going to be hard, but she had to tell her some way or another. Conan, I know this is going to sound strange to you and you probably won't believe it, but you have amnesia." Sakura waited as she let the other woman take it in. After seeing Conan's face change from confusion to uncertainty, she continued, "You see, the invasion ended almost 6 years ago. The war is over. The Akatsuki were ended after the members were defeated. I know it sounds strange and I'm not trying to freak you out or anything, but you do need to know what's going on today." Conan sat there confused. "Has it really been 6 years? The Akatsuki were defeated? I don't understand." "I can see that this could affect you pretty harshly, but things unfortunately for you get more interesting," Sakura stated, grabbing the attention of the other woman. "Well, I don't know how to say this without you doubting me, but well..." Sakura blushed slightly while looking somewhere else other than the other person in the room. "You started a new life here. Your husband is the 7th Hokage." "What?" Conan retorted rather harshly. "Do you expect me to believe that nonsense? What are you trying to pull?" Sakura sighed as she looked at the woman again. "I knew you would say that. Tell me, is it normal for your hair to grow so fast in a few days?" Conan didn't understand what she was talking about until she looked downwards and noticed her locks were reaching her chest. She felt her hair all the way around and noticed her entire hairstyle was completely changed. She had longer hair that fell past her shoulder blades. She pulled on it a little and felt that it was indeed her hair. Her mind raced shortly before she tried to calm herself. Freaking out wasn't going to get her anywhere. Plus, there were things in this story that didn't make sense. She snorted, "Nice trick, Sakura. But you're going to have to try harder to fool me." Sakura stared a few moments before she walked around Conan's bed, The woman eyed Sakura suspiciously as she went over to the window. If something like that won't change your mind, then maybe this will? Sakura pulled the blinds open, letting an intense light of the afternoon sky fill the room. After Conan squinted to readjust her vision, she looked out of the window and witnessed something she would have never expected. Her eyes widened as she shot up from her bed and reached the window. Outside was Konoha in its fully built glory. Nothing was destroyed and the city seemed bigger than she remembered. It wasn't until she looked over to the cliffside that she noticed something entirely different. It shook her to her very core. Lined on the cliff surface were all of the Hokage that ruled over the Leaf Village. She saw the original 5 that were there before, but she noticed a couple of new faces that graced the mountain. Hatake Kakashi's face was right after the 5th Hokage's face, and what came next left her speechless. The next face that lined after Kakashi's was none other than Naruto Uzumaki's. The Jinchuriki they were trying to capture became the 7th Hokage. Conan's demeanor started to crumble as she gazed upon the monument in awe. She couldn't say much of anything at that moment. Her eyes couldn't leave the last face on the cliffside. After she licked her lips subconsciously, she had to ask, "When you said that I was married to the 7th Hokage, did you really mean?" Sakura blushed again as she looked away from Conan but looked at the monument. "That you were married to Naruto?" "Yes, I did, your Mrs. Uzumaki Senju." Conan took a step back as she continued staring at the monument, then back at Sakura. What type of reality was she in? None of this made any sense. Since when would she fall in love with someone so much younger than her? How could she live in the Leaf Village and betray Nagato in this way? It wasn't until then that a thought occurred to her. Conan's eyes closed in finality as she blew a sigh. "This is a genjutsu. I should have figured that out from the beginning." Sakura frowned further as she saw Conan attempt to break the genjutsu but to no avail. After a few times of trying but failing at breaking her genjutsu, Sakura spoke up, "I'm sorry, Conan, but this isn't a genjutsu and it's not a lie. Everything that you see here is the truth. Naruto is the Hokage and yes, you are married to him. As hard as that is to believe." After Conan attempted a few more times, her face grew more concerned and nervous. This was either a very powerful genjutsu that she couldn't break out of, or she was really in the future with a new life that she never knew she had. She stared at her hands in shock as she realized that there was some truth to Sakura's words after all. She shot her sight over to Sakura before she started turning into paper. There was no way that this was true. You're lying to me. Get me out of this genjutsu now." Conan yelled intensely as she fluttered her papers around her body. She wasn't going to let someone take advantage of her in this way. She had to get out of it, and find Nagato again. Hopefully, he would have more answers to her being captured. Sakura was scared stiff as she tried to push her nervousness down. She never expected Conan to retaliate this far, and she wasn't properly prepared to handle her at this time. Conan's papers slowly went up Sakura's body as she tried her best to make Conan relax. "Stop. Please listen to me. You really do have amnesia. Calm down." Being calm was the last thing on her mind as her papers drew nearer to Sakura's head. Flip. Conan's eyes widened as she saw a yellow blur appear before her and Sakura, knocking Sakura out of the way and pushing Conan to the bed. "Ladies, I thought we've already been over this. Fighting never solves anything, you know?" A voice that sounded familiar but unfamiliar at the same time shouted as Conan looked up to see who interrupted them. There stood a taller man with blonde spiky hair and a black and orange windbreaker. She could see him eyeing her from his peripheral. A gentle smile adorned his features as she noticed his 3 whisker marks on his cheek. "Naruto? What are you doing here? I thought you were swarmed with important meetings today?" Naruto ran his hand through his hair as he laughed. "I am. But I was getting tired of it, and decided I need to see my wife instead. I created some clones and dashed." Conan saw him smile genuinely at her as he turned in her direction. Shock ran rampant in her mind as Naruto kneeled down and grabbed her hand affectionately. "How are you feeling, beautiful? Do you hurt anywhere?" She looked up and saw the concern laced in his smile. Her reaction was less than what he expected as she quickly removed her hand from his. He frowned slightly as her stare left him questioning. Conan, are you alright?" She continued to stare him down in confusion as she reeled in all of the information that was laid before her. This man was definitely an older version of the Jinchuriki she was supposed to help capture. Although more handsome than his teenage version, he had an air of maturity in his presence, but also had a simple childish nature about him. It was interesting, but she felt for a moment that she could confide in him. While lost in thought, Conan didn't realize it as quickly as it came, but Naruto wrapped his arms around her in a warm hug. Conan paled as she felt the man hug her. She hadn't received a hug from anyone in years, and she definitely didn't expect one from the Jinchuriki. Her arms shook a little as she slowly placed her arms on his back. She gave him a few gentle pats, trying to just let whatever was going on happen. Naruto must have noticed something strange because he pulled away from her with a frown. Naruto, I need to tell you something, Sakura brought up as she looked at the now confused man in the room. Because of the accident that she had, there have been complications. Well, she has amnesia. Naruto frowned further as he heard this new turn of events. How much does she remember? Sakura returned his saddened reaction. She only remembers up until the invasion. When pain attacked the village, she doesn't remember anything about you or even your daughter. Naruto could only gaze at the ground aimlessly as he took in the information. It was strange. Konan was in a coma for 3 days because of her accident, and now she doesn't remember anything about him or their daughter. He only sighed as he looked over to her and saw her uncertain expression at his thinking. I guess this relates to what Hanan was saying to me when I saw her in the hall. Naruto chuckled despondently. Is there any hope of her memories coming back? I don't know, Naruto. Her brain scans came back clean, so it's possible that it's only temporary and will return in a few hours. Naruto smiled as he heard this information, but Sakura didn't keep him hanging long. But it's also possible that it can take days or weeks to return, or maybe even not at all. Naruto turned gloomy from this information. It was strange looking at her and seeing her look at him with such an indifferent look, an entirely different persona from 3 days ago. He smiled a toothy grin and looked at Conan. I don't think it will never return. Even if it doesn't come back, I guess I'll just have to romance her again. He winked at Conan, who was only confused at what was happening around her. The longer everything was going, the more real her situation felt. Conan was listening to the entire conversation, and when she heard them talk, everything slowly began to set in. She had so many questions, and yet, she couldn't bring them forth. What could she say? She was apparently in the future, and was in a future that she never fathomed would be plausible. Married to Naruto? Akatsuki are gone? She lives in Konoha now? It just felt like a lot of information to take in. Naruto? Conan responded while looking at him pensively and fidgeting with the blanket underneath her. Is the war really over? Naruto's smile widened as he responded, Yep. The entire shinobi world came together and saved the world. Naruto solemnly looked to the blanket as memories were refreshed in his mind. You were there too. You helped us save the world, and we couldn't have done it without you. She was there? Conan couldn't help but feel strange about these revelations. There was only one thing running rampant in her mind after all of this. Where is Nagato? Naruto stiffened at her question and looked away from her to the window outside. It was a hard thing to tell her. After so many years, Naruto didn't know how she would react after being told that he died. He remembered her crying every other night about him the first couple of weeks they were together after the war. But those outbursts became more sparing as the months drove by. She eventually moved on from his death, but not without honoring his memory in some way. I see, Conan replied quietly. It did make sense that Nagato would be dead during this time. He was an enemy, and he had to be killed by them. It made her grip tightly on the blanket to stifle the tears that were trying to come forth. Hey Sakura, can you leave us alone for a little while? I need to talk to her, was all that Naruto said as he looked over to his teammate. She nodded her head silently, understanding exactly why he was doing this, and they needed their privacy. Maybe Conan would begin to remember. After Sakura walked out, Naruto looked at Conan with conviction. It was strange to her, that look he was throwing her way. She felt small underneath his gaze, but she couldn't break the eye contact either. What did he want? Was he going to tell her something important? Was he trying to earn her trust? Or was he still trying to butter her up with a genjutsu? The last question didn't seem possible anymore because the longer she watched the things around her, everything was normal. It felt normal. Conan, I know what you're thinking, he said softly as his gaze lightened upon her. Nagato didn't die a villain. Conan's expression changed to shock at Naruto's revelation. Actually, Naruto said, to a degree, he actually died a hero. Now that statement surprised her. A hero? What do you mean? He attacked your village and destroyed it. Wouldn't that create plenty of reason for him to be hated? Naruto chuckled softly at Conan's reaction. It was expected, true, but he did revive the people he killed afterward, sacrificing his life for others. In the end, he paid his dues. Don't tell me he used. Yes, he used that jutsu, he responded sadly. It cost him his life for the survival of others. He entrusted me with the will of finding peace before he died. I learned so much from him that day and… Naruto blushed as he looked over to her. And that was when I met you. Conan thought momentarily before speaking again. A thought from something earlier resurfaced. Sakura told me that you are my husband. Is that true? Naruto laughed genuinely as he looked down to his pants and scratched the back of his head. Yeah, that's true. Crazy, isn't it? How did we, Conan asked, blushing slightly at her current situation. To her, this was all news, so she was curious to their relationship together. Fall in love? Naruto answered with a blush that matched Conan's. Well, it's a long story. Conan was discharged from the hospital later that day. Naruto had decided to take her to their home since there was no use in having Conan sit in the hospital anymore. After her discharge, Conan took steps out of the building and into the streets. Walking side by side with Naruto was strange. Firstly, he wore his Hokage coat that blew freely in the wind as he took every step. She didn't know, but it seemed like he was trying to make the best of their situation. Conan was told earlier to act as naturally as possible while walking out of the hospital. She didn't know what counted as natural, so she just walked side by side with him and tried to put on a smile. But that was far more difficult than it seemed. While walking together, she couldn't help but notice the nice stares that the villagers were giving Naruto. They were greeting him with smiles and coming up to him and asking questions while they walked. Naruto always seemed to smile and gave them help when they needed it via Shadow Clone. He always seemed to be willing to help people, and the way he was treated was far more different than what information she was given about the boy. While walking next to her, Naruto leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Hey, it's okay. Just wait until we get home and you can relax for a while." Hearing that made her feel somewhat better, although her being stuck in the future was still jarring. She never once believed stuff like this would happen. She had to talk to Naruto and actually figure out just how their lives ended up this way. There was no other way to do this. Even while the both of them walked, she herself noticed that she was receiving gentle smiles and stares from the villagers as well. People in the streets held no malice at all towards her. This irked her and only further proved that things around her were real. After walking a good ways away, they finally arrived at a decently sized home with a garden that was in the front yard. Flowers of various species littered the yard, and there were also rose bushes that lined the fence. Conan's mind swirled around the thought of the garden that she was walking through. I wanted to have a garden of my own when things passed. It looks like I actually did get my wish. Naruto saw her look at the flowers amazed, and he couldn't help but chuckle at her. Aren't they pretty? We planted them together when you told me that you wanted them. I like flowers too, so I prepared it for us and we began working outside together. That was fun. She only looked at the back of his head and thought as he took his keys out and unlocked the front door. Walking inside, she noticed it was cooler than it was outside. She was already sweating outside, and it had been only 15 minutes since they walked out of the hospital. Hey Conan, you can take a shower if you want. I'm going to cook us some dinner in the meantime. I'm sure that you aren't feeling entirely well, so I only want you to relax for a while. I can handle things around here, Naruto said while walking into the kitchen. He had already taken off his coat and was opening pantries looking for ingredients. Conan only stood at the doorway to the kitchen as she was processing everything. She looked around the house and it felt homely. She liked it, but it felt foreign to her. After Conan didn't say anything, he looked over to her and saw her uncertain face looking nowhere in particular. He took a cup from the shelf and poured some water into it before walking over to her and reaching his hand out. Here you go. You must be thirsty after being in there for so long without anything to drink. He handed the glass to her, and she took it in nervousness before drinking it. Her taste buds woke up immediately as she drank the water and downed the entire glass in a matter of seconds. Naruto only laughed as she handed the glass back to him, and he filled it up again. Catching her lost stare, he had to do something about it. Hey, let's go sit in the living room then. I think dinner can wait. Conan nodded her head silently as she let Naruto walk past her into the room across the hall. There was a couch that sat against the window and a recliner that was adjacent to it. Naruto sat on the couch as Conan joined him, but sat on the other end, leaving a good amount of space between them. Conan drank more of her water before sitting it down on a coffee table in front of them. Her eyes seemed to be fixated on the water in the glass. So, Naruto said idly as he gazed upon her, I guess you have a lot of questions for me, huh? I have many, Conan responded softly as she turned her eyes to him. First, I want to know what happened with the invasion. Why did it fail? Naruto thought momentarily. This was a surprisingly difficult question to answer. He didn't know all of the details. He only knew the basics of what happened. Well, I wasn't around when Nagato started attacking everyone. I was off training with the toads. I only arrived after he created a crater of my village. Conan thought momentarily as he said that. So, Nagato used that much power on Naruto's village. He must have been desperate to a degree. I wouldn't worry about it for now, Conan. That stuff has already passed, Naruto said with a fling of his wrist. Anyway, he did a lot of damage, but there were survivors. I came in late to the scene having just prepared for battle and saw my village as nothing more than a hole. I was furious, Naruto said as he looked down. I was hurt. I felt that there was no reason for all of this to be happening. But yet it did. I never knew this type of thing could happen. But I prepared for the worst anyway. Conan stared at his reactions and could relate to some extent. Nagato, when he was controlling Yahiko's path, told me many things about his ideas and what he believed. We fought. Naruto looked into Conan's eyes then. After seeing a friend of mine become severely wounded by Nagato, I went crazy. I unleashed 6 tails at first, but went to 8 tails a little afterwards, in the end. I met my father in my mind and he resealed my seal for me. Your father? Conan questioned. But I don't understand. Your father passed away many years ago. We never had any records of who he was, nor do I remember anything other than you being an orphan. Well, Naruto started quietly, but with a small smile. When my father passed away, he sealed an image of his chakra into me should I ever need it if I go berserk. Just for the record, my father was the 4th Hokage. Conan remembered the stories of that man. How could she not hear them? People used to talk about him all the time when she was younger. Those stories were basically ingrained in her mind at this point. I guess it's fitting, Conan replied in thought. I'll tell you more about him later. But there's more, Naruto said as he cleared his throat. In the end, I found Nagato in your paper tree. I walked inside and talked to him. After some things were said between us, he came to a conclusion that I wasn't wrong. I helped him see what he couldn't see. Conan's shock set in. How did you do it? I've tried several times to help him move on, but it couldn't be done. He was set in his ways, so how? To be honest, I don't know, Naruto replied with his hand to his chin. I guess we had more in common than we originally thought before. Conan couldn't believe how easily Nagato was changed just by a mere boy. Her thoughts rolled back to the thought that this boy is now her husband. This only left further questions. This is where you met me, right? Naruto chuckled lightly. That's correct. To be honest, when I first met you, I didn't know much about you and thought you were cold, but his eyes went to hers as his hand went to her shoulder. The longer I knew you, the more I realized how wonderful you actually were. You slowly opened up to me over time and then, I saw the real beauty that you had within. It wasn't easy though. Conan was intrigued. How on earth would she start a relationship with the boy they were trying to capture? I must have been desperate. There's no way that this would ever work. We aren't even the same age. Her voice rose at the end, causing Naruto to squint a tad. Hey, Conan, Naruto spoke softly as he scooted over to her. You weren't desperate. We've already been over this. This isn't the first time you've said this to me. Don't worry. Conan's eyes watered as she looked to the floor. Why was everything happening like this? Why did it all feel so wrong? This life that she was living went way beyond normal. What was her alter self thinking? Where was any of this considered normal? She was an enemy. She was older, plus, let's not forget that her entire life was spent on helping Nagato and his plans. There was no one for her. She was alone and she was used to it. Conan, it's alright, Naruto said as he went to her and tried to give her a hug. He was thwarted in his plans as she pushed him away. I'm sorry, Naruto, but this is still new to me, she replied while looking away from him with her hand up to her forehead. I need time to figure things out, please understand. Naruto smiled softly at her as he got up from his spot. I understand. I think we're done talking now. You should just take a shower. I'll be making dinner for us. Hanan will be home in an hour or so from classes. But don't worry, I will deal with her for now. Conan thought quietly. You mean our daughter? The one that I saw earlier? That's the one, Naruto laughed as he walked into the kitchen. After thinking momentarily, Conan decided to follow Naruto's words and walk to the bathroom. Oh, Conan, Naruto said quickly, making her turn her head to face him. Our room is at the end of the hall to the left. You'll find your clothes in the closet. The bathroom is to the right. Thank you. She turned back to walk back to the bedroom her husband mentioned. She opened the door and stepped within. A king-size bed was positioned to her right against the middle of the wall with a nightstand on each end. Her hands reached over to a dresser with a mirror, and she caressed the dresser top before placing a hand against her reflection. She saw the bags under her eyes from exhaustion and noticed her features looked older but still virtually the same. She immediately noticed her hair that fell past her shoulder blades, and she took a lock and twirled it around her finger. No matter how much she thought this could be a lie, those thoughts immediately fell apart the moment they were brought up in her mind. She could only sigh as she touched the patch that was over the bump on her forehead. Minor pain erupted on her face and she winced. Thoughts rushed to her head about the head injury and its role in the problem that she was currently facing. It made sense that she could have amnesia over everything that has transpired today, but her thoughts still lingered because things just seemed too surreal. Breathing softly to regain her composure, she opened her eyes. She noticed a couple of picture frames laced around the dresser. The first one she laid eyes upon was a picture of Kakashi, Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke as a group. They seemed genuinely happy and newly appointed within this picture. Another picture she noticed was one of Jiraiya and Naruto together in a silly pose. Her heart clenched at the image of her mentor, but it made her smile a little before she averted her eyes to the last picture. There was a hitch in her breath. If nothing that was said hit home yet, then this was something that surely did. It was a picture from a few years ago, a family portrait with her, Naruto, and Hanan, who was only a baby. She noticed the gentle happiness that radiated on everyone's faces. Conan's lip quivered gently. Her eyes could never rip away from the image that now burned within her sight. Her hand wound around the frame as she saw her expression that showed a smile she had never seen herself wear before. Her mind raced as she fought to make sense of the picture, of what it meant, trying to discern if it was not but an illusion, but nothing changed. Her face still smiled back at her almost as if she was mocking her. She closed her eyes to staunch the tears as she threw the frame towards the bed in frustration. Damn it! Her hands rushed to her eyes to wipe her wet irritation away. This reality was far harsher than she realized. That smile. She opened her drawer and pulled out some underwear that she assumed was hers and also walked into the closet and found some clothes. She had way more of a variety than she thought she would. Her eyes scanned the rows of clothes that ranged from simple shirts to rather lavish dresses, trying not to let loose with her emotions. She pulled something out that she thought seemed okay for housewear and walked across the hall to the bathroom, and closed the door rather forcefully. ////BP/. Hearing the slam of the bathroom door, Naruto eyed the hall quietly. Even though he didn't show it, he had concern for his wife. He was trying to keep an upbeat attitude about the situation, but ultimately, his internal struggle was causing conflict. There were so many problems now. He couldn't touch his wife because she had amnesia and knew nothing about him. Sakura said that she could regain her memories again, but there was no guarantee because the situation was strange. Naruto only sighed as he busily flipped the meat and vegetables in the pan. He was hoping her memories would come back and they could laugh again. Their times that they shared together meant a lot to the both of them. He knew Conan's struggles growing up and she knew his. They coped with each other and gave the other the comfort that was well deserved. Their daughter only brought them closer as a family when she was born. Brushing those thoughts away in frustration, Naruto continued to focus on their dinner. /BP////. Konan finished brushing her hair with a brush that she assumed was her own brush. That shower felt great to her, and it took some of the stress that she was feeling away. It had been a long time, at least from her current state of mind, that she had taken such a nice shower. It helped her thoughts ease away. If only temporarily. There were so many thoughts that were still lingering, but for now, she decided to leave them to rest. She walked outside of the bathroom and heard the sounds of giggling echoing from down the hall. Curious as she was, she tiptoed down the hallway. The giggles got louder until a scream exploded in the house. Conan saw a girl run around the corner and hide behind her with disheveled hair and a red face. "Protect me from Daddy, Mommy!" Conan looked at the girl confused before she looked up to Naruto and his silly expression as he came around the corner. His eyes darkened as he looked at the little girl. "Come here, Hanan. The tickle monster hasn't finished." Naruto looked at Conan and stopped what he was doing. He rubbed the back of his head. "Ah, looks like you found my weakness. I give up." Conan looked at the younger girl that was holding on to her. The girl's tongue poked out at the dad and he only sighed. Conan's gaze never left her daughter. She didn't know what it was. But a sudden impulse caught her, and she couldn't help herself. Hanan? HM? What is it, Mommy? The little girl asked, looking up at her curiously. Conan's eyes started to water again as she stood there. This little girl, she was her daughter. She was someone that came from her. The little girl was cute, and she seemed so full of life. She couldn't help but see her own self within her. Her past self. Reality came crashing down all over again. This was her new life. This was who she was now. She was no longer the Konan of old that helped maintain Akatsuki. She was now the wife of the current 7th Hokage and a mother. Her hand shakily went to the top of the little girl's head, and she rubbed it softly with her hand going through her hair. Naruto watched them silently. He didn't want to interrupt the moment that Konan was having with her daughter. It was then he saw his wife kneel down and hug their daughter. Her tears started rolling down her cheeks and she only sobbed. Mommy, what's wrong? Konan only cried harder when she said that. Naruto looked at her somberly, and could only think of how Konan used to be before they met. It hurt him when he thought about how much Konan was in pain from her past. He knew that this may be a lot for his wife, but he couldn't do anything about it except hope that her memories returned soon. After a few minutes, Konan stood up and wiped her eyes. She walked over to the table and sat down. Naruto only watched her in concern. Knowing full well that she was experiencing overwhelming emotions right now, he didn't say anything. He only smiled slightly and sat beside her. Hanan followed quietly and sat down at the dinner table. She didn't want to make her mom any more sad than she already was. Not many words were spoken when they ate. The sounds of utensils hitting bowls and plates filled the atmosphere, and eating felt like an eternity. But the strange mood lingered. Naruto would glance up to his wife and see her staring at her plate mindlessly. She would eat some and then chew as if she were lost in thought. Hanan would just eat without a care in the world. She didn't really mind any of what was going on at the moment. Naruto was worried though. Konan hadn't said much the entire time they had been sitting at the table. He decided that he needed to break the ice. So, how is your head feeling? Konan lifted her head to match his eyes. It is still sore, but it does feel better compared to this morning. That's good. Naruto didn't have anything else to say to her because she didn't really know anything that was happening these days. Hanan, how was class today? Naruto brought up to try and change the mood. It was okay. We learned some history of Konoha today, she said between bites while kicking her feet absent-mindedly. I don't know why the other kids think it's so boring. Naruto chuckled at his daughter. Well, when I was in school, I used to think it was boring. You must have gotten your mother's genes. But Daddy, Mommy's jeans are too big for me. I can't wear them. A soft chuckle emanated from beside Naruto. He looked over and saw his wife smiling at their confused daughter. Seeing her smile only made his grin appear again as they started to eat again. The daughter only puffed her cheeks out. Hey! Don't laugh at me, it's mean. Well, maybe if you weren't so cute, we wouldn't laugh at you, Hanan, Naruto said with a grin. I'm not cute. Hanan retorted with a huff. I'm a strong girl, you know. I can't argue with that, Naruto responded with a small laugh as he dug into a piece of meat. The table remained quiet for only a moment longer before someone spoke up. Hanan? Yes, Mommy? Naruto stopped eating and looked over to his wife with shock. He honestly didn't expect her to start any conversation, let alone talk to their daughter. He was intrigued to say the least. Do you have any friends in school? I have a couple of friends, but they sit far away from me, Hanan answered while stuffing her face with another mouthful. Most girls don't like me though because Daddy is the Hokage. Naruto leaned over to his wife in a whisper. Hey, they are only jealous of Hanan. Since she's my daughter, they think Hanan is treated differently. I am treated differently. Hanan shouted. Daddy's helper ninja always watch over me. It's annoying. But I can't help that, sweetheart, Naruto said, trying to calm his little girl. They want to follow protocol since you are the Hokage's daughter after all. I don't like it, Hanan retorted harshly, while digging into her meal aggressively. Konan only laughed more at the little girl, even though she was still relatively new to all of this. Just being in the atmosphere really eased the tension at the table. She looked over to Naruto, who seemed to be smiling more after their conversation. Her thoughts went on to think about him as she continued to eat. ////BP/. Everyone finished eating. Konan brought her plate to the sink to wash it, but Naruto interrupted her. Hey, Konan, let me do the dishes. I can take care of this. You just prepare yourself for bed. It's okay, Naruto, Konan replied softly. I can at least do this much. My head doesn't hurt or anything enough to where I can't even do simple dishes. Naruto opened his mouth, hesitated, and sighed in defeat. Yeah, I guess you're right. If that's the case, then I will just put Hanan to bed now. Conan agreed and silently started washing the dishes while Naruto left the kitchen. Doing the dishes gave Conan some quiet time to herself. It also gave her something to do to occupy her mind so she wouldn't think too much. After she finished the dishes, she wiped down the counters and placed the rag back at the kitchen sink. She breathed a sigh of completion and walked down the hallway. She stopped when she heard Naruto's voice from the crack in the door. Acted the man by building a shelter. This person became best friends with him. Conan noticed the story was a story that she used to hear when she was younger. It was a story that her mother and father used to tell her. She felt a tugging at her heart as she watched Naruto tell the story in such detail. She could only see the back of his head, but that was enough to know that he was having fun in his mental journey. She could see Hanan laying down, and seemed to be getting drowsy from the story. For a moment, her daughter and her made eye contact and Hanan waved a little with her hand. Conan smiled a little as she moved past the door and into their room where she began to change into her night clothes. After brushing her teeth, she went to lay down when she spotted the frame that she threw on the bed earlier that day. She picked up the photo and looked at it once more. The image of her smiling genuinely with her newborn daughter brought her into thought. Her fingertips brushed against the surface. Seeing Naruto's hand around her waist made her have a strange feeling of disconnect. Trying not to dive any further into the picture, she went to the dresser and brought the frame back in a near-identical resting position. After that, she sighed. Today was just a long day and honestly, she was hoping that the next day would prove to be easier. She walked over to what she assumed was her side of the bed and pulled the covers over herself. After laying for another 10 minutes in silent thought, she was shaken out of her tired musings at the sound of the door opening. She looked over and saw Naruto as he walked into the room. Changing into his clothes, she noticed his bandaged arm and how he didn't bother removing them. Curiosity got the better of her. What is wrong with your arm? Naruto turned to face her while mid-shirt change. It's an old injury. I lost my arm in a fight against Sasuke at the Fourth War. This hand was made with the first Hokage cells. She was astounded by this revelation. Just what type of things were being done with first Hokage cells now? Her mind wandered. So, I heard you telling a story to Hanan as I walked by. Naruto smiled. Yeah. Hanan really loves when we tell her stories. She usually falls asleep after the first 15 minutes. I noticed, Conan responded unusually quietly. The story you were telling was one that my parents would tell me when I was younger. Did you learn it from me? Naruto only looked at her with a small smile. Well, yeah. You basically forced me to learn the story so I could tell it to our kids, I remember, he said while putting on his sleeping shorts. You told me that it was a story that had a lot of meaning to you, so I did my very best to never forget it. Conan gazed down at the bed. Yes, it does. After a few more moments, Naruto walked over to the bed, but surprising Conan by only grabbing a pillow, she sat up quickly as Naruto walked to the door. Where are you going? I'm going to sleep in the guest room. Since you have amnesia and don't know who I am, it would be rude of me to take advantage of this situation. He looked to Conan, who was only looking at the blankets after he said that. He smiled softly. Well, good night, I'll see you in the morning. Wait, Naruto looked confused as he turned to her. I think it's okay if you sleep in here, with me. What? Naruto asked with widened eyes. Are you sure? Conan blushed slightly as she looked in his eyes. Maybe the close contact will help me remember something? And even if this is something like this where I can't remember, I don't think I should leave my husband to another room only because I have amnesia. Naruto looked unsure about what she just said and thought momentarily. Conan was somewhat curious of doing this, but it was for the sake of her memory recovery. After Naruto thought momentarily, he answered, well, it couldn't hurt. Just let me know if it gets awkward to you. I don't want to scare you. You've been through a lot today. Conan breathed a sigh. Yes, I know. I will be okay. I just think I need someone right now. I don't want to be alone tonight. Naruto frowned at her statement, and walked over to the bed with his pillow. Conan watched him extensively as he laid himself in bed and turned off the light. The light outside of their window reflected inside the room in a bluish glow. She watched as Naruto looked in her direction, and she could only lock eyes with him, with each of them laying on their side. Conan felt it a good time to talk. Say, Naruto? Are we a happy couple? Naruto stared back at her before he smiled. Yes. She looked down to the bed sheet. Her eyes weren't betraying any emotion she was feeling. Do you love me? Naruto gazed into her eyes as she locked eyesight with him again. The dim light reflected against his hair and his cheek. His eyes radiated that light and expanded it into infinity. She was amazed. Looking at him in this light, and seeing him as her husband gave her strange feelings, he noticed her curious stare, and only smiled as he uttered softly, "I love you more than you will ever know." Hearing those words gave her butterflies. It was strange, she hadn't felt that way since Yahiko. But there was something about this guy that intrigued her, the more she talked to him. Even when it was about nothing in particular, the more real it felt. His words seemed genuine, and she couldn't help but slowly fall into his rhythm. It wasn't until then, when she felt his hand press against her face, that she felt herself stiffen. She looked at him in question only to be returned with a frown. She saw sadness envelope him. "You're crying." When did she ever start? She couldn't tell. Her eyes only closed as she felt his thumb wipe away her tears. This vulnerability. She was so weak. But she let him touch her. She let him in even without realizing. But she was okay with that. There was a man here that seemed to care about her. He was her husband and she was his wife. If anything, she should confide in him. If not for the sake of the returning the memories, but for the sake of her sanity. Naruto quickly wrapped his arms around her, pushing her head to his chest. Air escaped her lungs in astonishment, but only momentarily before she fell apart in his arms. She couldn't help herself. The night before to her was something that happened 6 years ago, and now she was in a future that she never thought she would have. She was with a man that she never would have imagined to even be conceivable. Life to her was a quick shift, and she couldn't handle the sudden change. Coming from a past life that involved nothing but heartache to a future where she is loved and living in a village that she used to be an enemy with, it just became too much. Why can't I remember? I feel so lost, Conan mumbled between sobs. Who am I? It's okay, Naruto said as he stroked her hair. You'll remember soon. Her words became incomprehensible as she continued to cry into his chest. This night was a night for acceptance. She was no longer in the past anymore. This life that she lived now is her life. Maybe one day, and hopefully soon, her memories would return. But for now, she needed her comfort, even if it was with someone that she met for the first time today.